Hello, my name is Allison Pelissier, also known as Allisun Shine, and I'm here today to talk about the nervous system in Polyvagal Theory. So the nervous system is a really dear subject to my heart because, it really kind of guides all the other systems in the body, and it's really powerful in terms of all kinds of interactions of well-being in our bodies. So we're going to start today by just taking a nice comfortable seat, tall spine, and just an invitation here to close your eyes or just let your eyes gently rest and turn into your internal space. As you sit here, just begin by taking a couple of nice deep breaths. And one of the great ways to kind of come into presence and coherence together is to take a nice deep breath and then a very audible exhale. So in and out, letting it all go. Let's do a couple more of those. Breathing in and out. And again, in and exhaling. Now continuing to breathe consciously. So taking a nice slow inhale for 5 seconds. And then matching with that with a 5-second exhale. Again, in for 5 seconds. And exhale for 5 seconds. In for 5 seconds. And out for 5 seconds. And one more time, in. And exhaling. Now just allow your breath to come back into a natural rhythm. And when you're ready, slowly opening your eyes and returning to presence here. So the reason I started with a little bit of breath today, and really that was 20 seconds, 30 seconds, not much time at all, was because breath is one of the most amazing ways to get into the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So actually each breath in can be thought of as the sympathetic activation, and exhaling is moving more into the parasympathetic or relaxation. So before we get into all of the magic of the nervous system, it's just a reminder right here and now that you always have the tool of breath at your disposal. So if you ever want to increase your activation, you can focus on the inhale. And if you ever want to decrease the activation, focus on the exhale. So that's our simple start. All right, great. And now we will go into the presentation. Just a moment. Technical difficulty. So the topic of these webinars is recalibration. During the times of, COVID and dealing with this big pause, a lot has come up for a lot of people. And one of the things that has come through me very strongly is that this is an opportunity for recalibration. And recalibration is really about coming back to our true selves, coming back to our center, to our wellness, to our light, the natural way that we want to be in this world before anything crazy or traumatic ever happened. Just coming back home to that essence of who we are. And when we're home in that essence of who we are, clarity, compassion, and creativity flow easily through our lives. And when we're not home in that space, then those three things, as well as many other aspects of our life, can become very complicated. So the first week's topics are about the nervous system and polyvagal theory. So we started with a little breath today as an entrance point. And it's just a reminder during the presentation today, if you ever feel a little bored or like you're not really taking in the information, to just come back to your breath. And I want to start with talking about change a little bit. So while change can be very intense and even terrifying at some point, change is the only constant in this universe. In every moment, all of your cells are going through all kinds of different processes, regulating your temperature, your heartbeat, so many different aspects of your well-being. The universe is constantly changing. And there's a big opportunity in that change to harness that potential towards greater growth. And the other side of that is the psychological little quote here, that what fires together wires together. So patterns that happen in your life strengthen the possibility of future patterning along the same lines. So this can be, again, good or more challenging. When beautiful experiences happen and we feel delight and awe and we're inspired, we're more likely to go after those same kind of experiences again. And then we feel an even greater resurgence of happiness. For example, if you listen to a song that you love and you know the words to, there's this amazing sense of happiness and bliss when the words come forward and you know what they are, or you know that the way that the sound of the song is going to go. It feels wonderful. And just in the same token, on the other side of things, when life is challenging and we feel stressed or things get very intense, if they went kind of a bad direction before, something terrible happened, there's this feeling inside of us that almost wants to recreate this, that will actually, conspire to make the same thing happen again, or at least will strengthen that pathway so we feel even worse if it does happen again. And so working with the nervous system is both acknowledging the constant change and that open possibility that's always present towards becoming even more of who we are, while at the same time, there's a need to recognize what has happened in the past, where we're truly at in terms of our baseline, and recognizing that there are patterns in our lives that can either lock us into place or with awareness, start finding new ways of expressing themselves. Okay, so in our little intro to the nervous system, we'll start very basically. So you probably learned this in science back in the day, but I think most people kind of forget a lot of this as we get older. There's two different types of nervous systems, or two main ones. There's the central and peripheral nervous system. So this chart is just great because it's super simple. In the nervous system, we have the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. So the central is, as you can see on the right picture there, the brain and spinal cord. And then the peripheral nervous system can be broken down more into the autonomic nervous system, which is around self-related, regulated action in the internal organs and glands. So these are the things that we're not consciously aware of, such as our heart rate, our breath. There's ways that we can kind of hack this, but generally these are the unconscious actions, our digestion, so many organs involved in this. And then there's the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system, which is more about the voluntary movement of muscles. So if I want to smile, there's this voluntary action of all these different muscles coming to life in my face to bring a smile forward. Then you can break down the autonomic nervous system into the sympathetic, or action, arousal, and the parasympathetic, which is the calming or the rest and relax. So we'll get a little further into those too. So within the autonomic nervous system, it's good to remember that, again, the reason why I'm so into this and really excited to share knowledge about the autonomic nervous system is that it really regulates all the other systems in our body. So if we're looking for change, which I'm always looking for, right? How do we better support ourselves and each other? How do we better show up? How do we better deal with things that have happened in the past so we don't repeat past mistakes? These are all related at the core to the autonomic nervous system. So we can break this into two parts. The sympathetic, which is the accelerator and the fight or flight activation, but also the inspiration for action. And we can think of that again as the breath in. And on the other side is the parasympathetic, which is more of the rest and relax response. It's where digestion and wound healing happens, where Darwin stated, feeding, shelter, and mating happen. So this is the breath out, the relaxation. And so previously there was always just this dichotomy between these two, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. You're either being activated in the sympathetic, you get adrenaline, cortisol rushing through your veins, you're springing into action. This is like an athlete right before running a marathon. It's just getting all that activation, or even me giving this webinar today. There's this little bit of nervousness and excitement, and my heart starts going a little bit faster. And this can also happen in a crisis, right? So someone really scary walks into the room and you're like, where did they come from? And your heart starts racing and you start getting activated. This is our response to stress. And with this sympathetic action, several things happen, which we'll go into further here. Okay, so we'll stay on the right side first with the sympathetic, this action. So different things happen within the body. And if you think of this in a very primitive way, you think that we are back when we're hunter-gatherers and living out in the wilds, and there's actually predators out there that could kill us and hurt us and harm us. Different actions need to happen in our body to keep us awake, alert, and ready to respond when something seemingly dangerous happens. So our pupils actually start dilating, our airways start relaxing, our heartbeat is increasing, our stomach stops digesting. There's a release of glucose, which inhibits the gallbladder from acting. The intestines stop working. Really a lot of this is that we're really gathering all of our energy towards this big action, right? So any of the other processes that aren't seemingly crucial in that moment need to be activated. And there's also, relaxing of the bladder. And this is also a place for action in terms of sexual energy. Now, the other side of this is the parasympathetic. So when we're really in the parasympathetic zone, there's a contraction of our pupils, saliva is stimulated. So maybe we're just enjoying a meal and relaxing. We can really get into that more kind of intimate awareness with ourselves. Airways are constricted, the heartbeat slows, the stomach starts digesting, which is again why this is like this relax and digest. And all kinds of other things. That's really about just these actions of the body, like the maintenance of the body, the healing, the restoring, and this is really important for our body and our lives. So much of the modern society is really sympathetic, like, let's go do the things, like, what did you do today? Are you going? How much, do you feel like you accomplished? This is all very sympathetic activation. But parasympathetic is just as important, if not more important. In fact, you can actually live without any sympathetic activation. I mean, you might be pretty relaxed and boring. I don't think it would be very engaged socially, because that takes a little bit of that sympathetic arousal, right? But you can survive. You can actually live in the parasympathetic. And that's why the parasympathetic is really our baseline of stress. Because if we look at our baseline as productivity, then that's going to wear out really fast. If we look at our baseline as being relaxed and centered and within ourselves, then we can be activated from there, but it won't take us over the edge. If we're ready in the sympathetic and we get more sympathetic activation, that can be very intense, which we'll get into. But basically, when we're speaking of the baseline level of stress, we're really talking about how much we're in that sympathetic. And again, this is kind of the older model where it just talks about these two different sides, right? So in research previously, they really looked at how, you would either be in the sympathetic, which would be this heart beating, racing, or you would be in the parasympathetic, which is just like this super relaxed energy. And it was kind of like one or another. If you know me, I love spectrums. And so I was very excited to learn about another theory that's related to the nervous system that came out in the 90s by Stephen Porges. And now this is polyvagal theory. So polyvagal theory breaks down the parasympathetic into two parts. It's actually multiple parts. Poly means multiple. There's just two main areas that we can focus on today. So he actually found that within the brain stem, the reason why it's called the ventral vagus and the dorsal vagus is because this big wandering vagus nerve, which you can see here on the left on this image, the vagus is the wanderer. That's what it means. And it really is because it is one nerve that is going all the way from, the brainstem all the way down. And it really affects so many different areas of the body. And what Porges was really curious about was that there seemed to be more to the vagus than simply just this relax and response, right? Not just this duality between arousal and relaxation, but it seemed more nuanced. And he was also curious about the different levels of kind of the brain's development. And that development through mammalian and more, primate-based development in the brain actually includes a lot of socialization. So he broke the parasympathetic nervous system down into two parts. There's the ventral vagus, which is more of this mammalian type of response, which, yes, is rest and relax, is what I should say, social engagement, and vocal prosody. So vocal prosody is really attuning to the person that you're talking to. So say you talk to somebody who's really excited. If you just speak in a flat monotone, are you actually engaging with them in a way that you're getting this positive feedback loop? Probably not. So vocal prosody allows us, when we're socially engaged, to be able to have these kind of nuanced and flowing conversations. So we might speak to someone in a certain way, we might just speak to someone else in another way. And that kind of social intelligence allows us to connect with many different types of people. And also to feel really comfortable in the way that we're speaking and be able to really take in the nuanced expression of others to understand in a deeper way where they're coming from and what their intentions are. Something that's different about the ventral vagus also is that it's myelinated, which means that it's kind of like a fatty sheath around the nerve, which makes it work way faster. So again, this is more of a recent development, an evolutionary development, and that's why Stephen Porges came up with the whole polyvagal theory to explain that there's more than just meets the eye. It's more than just this aroused or relaxed, that there's nuance in that. And then he also maintains that the dorsal vagus brings us back to that more reptilian consciousness, right? So this is the shutdown, freeze, paralysis, energy conservation, and sleep. So we'll get into this a little bit more, but the way that, reptiles exist is really different than mammals. Reptiles are really conserving their energy as much as possible. And they're either go, 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 or total shutdown and rest. And again, we're not quite in that same level. So sometimes, so that dorsal vagus reptilian response still exists in us, but it's not something that we're constantly in, hopefully, engaging in. So I'll go a little further on the next slide. So key to Porges' concept was social engagement and the importance of social engagement. Now, if you decide to attend any of the future webinars, the next one, I'm going to be actually talking about attachment theory and getting into developmental trauma and well-being through development. So, as you can see here, there's a father and a daughter, and they're locking eyes and really having this connection, right, through eyesight. So social engagement starts from us as a newborn with our connection with our providers, our primary care provider, which is usually the mother. And it continues throughout our life with our different social engagement networks. And this is so important to our well-being, as social engagement is one of the best ways to regulate ourselves, which we'll get into a little further. And I just think it's, fascinating that no one before Porges really brought social engagement forward as being such a necessary part of being human. Okay, so I made this little chart here to go through the different kind of levels of response. So basically what happens, there's 3 different ways that we can respond to stress or intense situations. Originally, we start with our most recent evolution, which is at the bottom, this green section of social engagement using the ventral vagus. So say you go to a loud party and there's a bunch of different people, and even though you're a pretty regulated person, you normally feel pretty good, you don't have a lot of anxiety, suddenly you feel this massive wave of anxiety. Okay, this the first thing that we do is turn to someone we care about. So the social engagement kicks in as our first response. So we start getting a little poke into this fight or flight. Our heart starts pounding a little bit faster. We say, wow, there's a lot of people here. I don't really feel so comfortable. Or like, what are those people over there doing? That looks unfamiliar to me. So, if some kind of feelings arise in a situation, the first thing that we do is turn to a loved one for support, someone we trust. And we can co-regulate with this person by looking at them and finding stability. They're seeing that, oh, actually, they don't seem that upset, so I'm going to be okay. And sometimes this happens very quickly. So in the series, maybe say you hear a really loud slamming noise and you're in the room with somebody else. You hear it, your body's a little bit frozen, but then you look immediately to other person, did you hear that? And you notice how they are responding. And if they seem like it's okay, then it comes through to you, oh yeah, it's okay. So that really helps calm us. Even just noticing, pack animals and mammals, for example, if one of them notices something, put their ears up, and then everyone has their ears up and everyone's listening, and then they slowly realize there's nothing. They all kind of calm down. So we have that within ourselves. The other thing that we have is self-soothing. So there's a few different exercises that we can do to really calm ourselves down. And, becoming self-reliant is also knowing how to do that self-soothing in certain times, but it still doesn't replace the need for social engagement. So calming, centering, and mindful action. When we're in the social engagement, we can be compassionate, creative, and clear. So we really want to spend as much time as possible in this social engagement or green zone. Now, let's say that we aren't able to stay in the social engagement zone for whatever reason. So something really loud happens, we're alone, or there's no one at the party we know, and we just start kind of freaking out. So this is when anxiety comes in, and it's just fascinating with anxiety how everyone describes it differently. It can be, anxiety can be experienced in so many different ways, but basically it's a discomfort, right? And if we don't have a way to calm ourselves down or to get that feedback from somebody else to calm down, we can start getting activated into the fight or flight, which is the sympathetic, right? So that's when mobilization happens. Our heart starts pounding, our hearing actually changes. So once you start getting activated that much, your hearing becomes really more nuanced, like, I kind of guess the opposite of nuance, blunted, to really hear loud sounds, to hear lower voices, things that, we're really tuning in to hear, like for danger sounds, primitive danger sounds. So if someone's talking to you and you're starting to get in the fight or flight, it's actually more difficult to listen to the words that they're saying because you're so activated and your hearing has changed. At this point, your digestion stops, your thinking becomes cloudy, and you find that you have a really hard time communicating effectively from this place. Something interesting that also can happen is that your visual perception can start changing. So the way that you perceive the world visually on a general basis is actually very small percentage of that is what's really happening in real time. Most of it is a combination of memories, past experiences, projections of what could happen next. This is the majority of what you're experiencing in any moment. So when your heart starts racing and you get the sympathetic activation going, this can further morph your perception of current reality by recalling old situations or traumatic memories when things didn't go well once, you were on this pathway. And people's faces can actually start looking scary or threatening, even if they have a very set face. So, there's two sides of this. There's a part where we really acknowledge what we can do for ourselves, right? And this is so important. And then the other side is really being there for our community, whether it's for our clients, our friends, our children, our parents, whoever it is that we're in our life with. If you can see someone start getting activated, remember that you have this power to connect with them socially to bring them back to earth, so to say. And we'll get into how trauma can affect that in a little bit, but just really remembering here that there is this possibility through communication. I mean, it also can be through touch. You can touch someone, you can hug someone, you can start bringing them back down, rationalize with them if they're able to hear you. Even just smiling and saying, it's okay, I'm here when you're ready. And this is very important because, our connectivity as a human species is what's really helping us evolve. And it's been really challenging for so many people during this time to be so alone. And, even the fact of like wearing a mask when you go out, now you can't tell, am I smiling? Am I not? There's just this blunting of expression. So it's just an interesting thing to note wherever you stand with all of this, that it's important to engage with at least a couple people in your life that you can talk to, and whether that's on video, chat, or in person, whatever feels comfortable to you. But as much as you can, share those facial expressions and get that feedback loop for social engagement. It really can assist in your overall well-being, and again, for their well-being as well. Now, if you get to this sympathetic fight or flight state and things continue to progress in a very scary manner, what happens from there, and this is usually what happens in pretty intense traumatic situations, right, is that you get the dorsal vagus activated, and this is the freeze response. So, I mean, animals, for example, like a rabbit, like I have a pet rabbit and it's adorable. And I have seen her literally go through these different stages, right? So she starts getting a little activated. Something scary is happening. For example, I'm trying to put her leash on, and she can start she gets into a little bit of mobilization, but as a rabbit, she quickly goes into the freeze state. And so at this point, she just calms down and comes totally still. And a lot of animals do this in a way that doesn't affect them over long term, because after they get to this freeze state of feigning death, immobility, fainting, dissociation, once they get to this frozen state, they just shake it off. So afterwards, they just clear it out of their system and boom, they're back in social engagement. And for us, it's not that easy. So once we've kind of gotten to that freezing state, there's a lot deeper work that we have to usually do to come back. And that's why the flexibility of the nervous system is really important, because it's not really just like what state are you in, but how much can you move fluidly through the states. That really determines your well-being. Okay, so we'll keep going through that a little bit more. But just important to note, again, the most primitive response is that fainting or disassociation, right? And immobility. And that can happen in very intense trauma to save us from having those memories. And this is also why it can be hard to actually recall what happened during traumatic events, because when we get into this state, which we'll talk about a little bit further, but the hippocampus really shuts down and we're just not able to process things the same way. And people can get stuck there. And that's the other thing with trauma. It's like once you've kind of reached that state, people can really, get stuck and frozen in that time, and then have a really hard time coming back, to both even feeling enough to feel activated, right? And get into that sympathetic of encouragement to move on and do that. And also, especially to socialize. And there becomes this crazy paradox between really wanting socialization and also just being so overwhelmed by it. So we'll go into that a little further. So I made this graphic here to talk about, and we'll get into this more in the third talk about positive psychology and really being the best that you can be. But in the center of this is the flow state. So you can see the little pattern of the flower of life here. And that's kind of the zone that you would want to stay in a healthy way, right? So the flow state in the center is when everything is absolutely just happening. And the flow state doesn't mean that you're always just in the social engagement, but that you can kind of move through different states and then find the flexibility to come right back in to social engagement. So for example, if we did just live, and I know some people like that. So you're just in the social engagement, you're just taking it all in. It's like, how do you pay your bills? What are you doing with your life? Sometimes like a exciting thing that you challenge yourself to do activates that sympathetic, but it doesn't actually, it activates the sympathetic, but it doesn't get you into overwhelm, right? It doesn't take you all the way to fight or flight, but you just get a little bit of activation, which carries things on. And what you don't really want to get into is a lot of the immobilization or total shutdown. But even people who have worked, through a lot of trauma will still have kind of imprints of certain things. And so there's an awareness that can be cultivated there when you're actually moving into that frozen state. Okay, let's keep going. So at this point, we're going to talk a little bit about the fabric of your reality. So we've gone through a few different levels of, whether you're in the social engagement, the sympathetic, or the parasympathetic. And another question comes up of how does your body know, or how do you know what's going on? I spoke a little bit earlier about this actual level of awareness and how, what we're even perceiving in this current moment is mostly just generated through perception in different ways, which can also be memories or past experiences, or even just current feelings within ourselves. So I'm going to guide you through a few different exercises to come into awareness about the fabric of your reality. So I call it the fabric of your reality because these are the different parts that make up how you're experiencing life right now. Okay, so we'll start with a proprioception. So proprioception is a sensing through physical awareness of your body and muscles. So I just invite you to close your eyes and take your right hand and start just touching different areas of your body. Maybe start with gently tapping the heart space. And then just feeling, maybe even with both hands, your shoulders, and giving them a tiny rub. Just becoming aware of your shoulders, like, oh, are you stiff there? How is that feeling for you? This is your proprioception. Okay, so maybe give your shoulders a little massage, and then come further back, maybe rub your belly a little bit, rub your lower back, see how that feels, your hips, middle back, upper thighs, and then just sit still. Now, as you take a couple deep breaths, just notice how much you can be aware of your body. So notice how relaxed your shoulders are or how stiff they are. Just notice what your awareness is of your body right now. So this is your proprioception. Now, if something suddenly changes in that, that would actually change your reality. So, and it's very interesting how interlinked it all is. For example, if something kind of anxiety inducing is happening, you might find that your shoulders actually rise up. Or you may find that, if something's intense, you start slouching. And so let's feel that a little bit too. So the next step is to really hunch. Just let yourself drop over and try breathing like this. So when we're hunched over in this physical posture, our heart is literally collapsed. We really are perceiving the world from this kind of dark way. And this is normal. I mean, this is a protection stance, right? Like, don't get close to me. I'm not safe, I need my space. This is protection. Now try sitting up, rolling your shoulders back, feeling your spine nice and tall, and breathing from this space. Your breath can be so much deeper and fuller. Your heart is just blasting open to the world. Your shoulders are relaxed. This is a confidence stance. Okay, this is when you're in your power, you're open to the world. And so much of our posture really affects our well-being, right? And this is our proprioception. So this is one aspect that makes up our reality. And interestingly, with mirror neurons, so mirror neurons are what we perceive in somebody else, and we have this amazing feeling when we're matching what the other person's experiencing. But it's also like a judgment, it can be, of where a person's at based off of, how they're holding themselves, for example. So that's why another reason it's like, yes, our internal reality really shifts when we have, the body awareness of our posture being up, but also the way other people perceive us in their internal awareness shifts. And they might copy you. I mean, I find myself also, sometimes we on some level really want to connect with people. And again, that's our social engagement nervous system, right? So there's nothing wrong with wanting to connect with people, but we can actually find ourselves imitating the posture of others to kind of fit in and feel better, right? So if you're sitting with somebody who's really just like dropping down, you might start dropping down. And that's how we really influence each other's reality in a lot of ways, is through the mirroring in that sense. And conversely, if you're someone who holds yourself in a, good position and you're confident, other people might feel more confident or stand taller around you as well. So we're all really influenced by this. Okay, so now exteroception. This is sensing through seeing, hearing, and smelling. So just allow your eyes to soften a little bit, and then just kind of looking slowly around your room. See like why you look where you do. Your eyes wander. See what catches your eye. So this is kind of, this is our exteroception. Also, maybe we're hearing some sounds. It's raining here in Colorado, so I can hear the little dripping, and maybe that gets me to look in that direction. Maybe some smells are wafting through. So this really greatly influences our fabric of our reality, right? These different senses. But it's not everything. Okay, so then there's interoception. So this is the awareness of wellness from the sensing within our bodies, right? So a lot of psychological imbalances are really associated, for example, with, a stomach ache. So a lot of kids will complain of like this, and they call it psychosomatic experience of feeling like a stomach ache if things are getting stressful or intense in their life, right? And there's just really like sensitive awareness that we can bring to our body to really feel how we're perceiving the environment. Because the way that we're perceiving the environment actually happens that our brain, our neocortex in the front, like comes to understand what's happening last. So a lot of it is coming first from these different, trigger responses that are unconscious, where you don't even know we're being triggered on some level. But what we can start bringing awareness to is these different layers of perception, right? So the interoception, being aware of the wellness from the senses within our body. Maybe we know something's not quite right because we feel our stomach contracting slightly. Maybe we have a weird feeling in our ears. People describe all different kinds of ways of interoception, and our body can really teach us a lot from that. And then the next step is emotional awareness. So correctly identifying and feeling emotions is really crucial to creating our fabric of reality. So it's often been seen that, if you don't acknowledge these feelings that you have and give them time, to be present with them, that, all kinds of different things can happen. You can get cancer, like you can have, a lot of people have autoimmune diseases. And a lot of that, there's many different factors that can contribute to these type of things. But a big part of that is the emotional awareness, and, there's layers to it. There's sometimes we need to just kind of suck it up and keep going, right? I remember my father teaching me when I fell off a bike and I was like, oh my God, it hurts so bad. Is this like, you can actually also just not focus on that pain and get up and find other inspire things to keep going, right? And I learned from him how to kind of disassociate that way from my feelings to keep going. And this can be helpful in a sense, say that, you're starting to get triggered in a conversation and it doesn't really feel the right time to just open that conversation, talk about you in that moment, but you can kind of like make a bookmark on it to come back to later. The thing is, if you don't come back to it and mourn that and feel that, and you just suppress it and ignore it, that's when it starts building up inside your body in a way that's really going to lead to more physical things as a last resort. We have like our energetic knots and tightness and dark spaces that can happen. And if we really just keep ignoring it, and eventually will come through in a physical way. So that's important, to be aware of emotions, to be, plan time to feel emotions, to know that it's not wrong to feel those, but then also to just, really be aware of how we're working with that emotional awareness. So if we'll talk about this a little further next. Okay, but for now, keep moving on. Neuroception. So Porges, who came up with the polyvagal theory, also had this understanding of neuroception. And it makes me really excited because of my subtle energy awareness that I'm really into. And so your neuroception can be understood as your kind of subconscious perception of threat, which is cued by your environment or conditioning. So if things, someone, it can be simple as someone, say you grew up with an alcoholic person and then just smelling someone's breath, that was violent. Say if a family member was violent, an alcoholic, say then you smell like alcohol on someone, that can just be an amazing trigger, right? And like you're suddenly freaking out and you don't even know why. And again, so if these traumatic incidents happened, for example, and you can't even really remember what happened, your body has this subconscious perception of the threat. Your body remembered what happened. And so even anything that kind of reminds you of that, whether it's a totally different person, situation, all kinds of things, if you find any resonance with that traumatic thing that happened, you can actually start, getting cued into arousal, into the sympathetic activation simply by that. So really understanding that brings us back to all these other different layers, right? And the more we can be mindful with how we're perceiving the reality, really take in what is happening around us, really being present and focused and not in our mind, memory stories, old understandings, then we can kind of find that clarity. All right, keep going. So unfortunately, after a really stressful thing happened, our baseline level of stress after trauma can change. So Pavlov is pretty famous for his conditioning studies doing with dogs and, getting them to like ring a bell. And then they knew when the bell rang that they were going to eat, and they'd start salivating before the food even got there. So something else that he really looked into that's a little less well known is what he called the conditioned reflex. And so the conditioned reflex is actually that these poor dogs, for example, after, being exposed to this flood and like all these different traumatic situations in a row, they started, what we try to do as mammals and humans is really establish this like kind of security. We want stability. So they established stability from a terrified place, which was a learned helplessness or being stuck. So this is what can also happen after trauma, that, we actually, even though we're not feeling that good or we're not feeling okay, even, we still try to establish a baseline from there. And we can modify that slightly from this space, but we're really stuck in that zone. So this is where a lot of anxiety or depression can come in, learned helplessness, this feeling of being stuck, not really even seeing the possibility for change, disassociation in general life, poor memory and focus. And, it's really hard for people with really severe trauma that haven't overcome that because they often lack a filter. So they're experiencing either sensory overload where everything's just so overwhelming, or numbness where you're feeling nothing. And it can go back and forth with a lot of people, or some people choose one or another. You don't choose it, but that's kind of what's happening for you. Generally at these points, then, we bring in less skillful habits to attempt to regulate, which can be like drinking alcohol or, taking drugs or cutting to feel something. These things start happening. And what's so unfortunate about, being in this conditioned reflex or these lower level baseline of trauma is that the hippocampus is shut down. So that means that, really explicit memories can't be accessed, neurogenesis can't be activated. So life has this kind of like scary dream like energy. And, at this point, just engaging in conventional talk therapy is pointless, right? Because you can't really reach into that person. I mean, the person might even have memory of really what happened or what's going on, or an ability to focus long enough to really talk about it, or an interest in even getting there. And so that's kind of where it's important to talk about these like top down versus bottom up responses to regulation, right? So if we're talking about top down, that's coming from this like mindfulness, active awareness approach where it's like, oh, I'm going to start saying my affirmations in the morning And I'm going to logically notice, oh, well, I'm feeling a little anxious, but there's no reason for that. I'm safe here. This feels good. Like, look, I'm going to pay attention to this little shiny thing over here to bring my attention back to the present, or notice someone's hair, or compliment their clothes, or just come back into social engagement in a very rational, intelligent, and top-down way. And that's great, right? If we're not severely traumatized or we don't have any major triggers, and regardless, it's a good thing to work on. But, you know, if there's something really deep within us that hasn't been healed, it's like taking a weed and just cutting it off. It's like the root's still there. And so even though we're like, oh, okay, things are going pretty well, I know so much about my life and wellness, but then sometimes these triggers still really come up. And that's because there's still that root. And that's when it really is important to get down to the bottom up types of healing and recalibration. So we'll go a little into that. So if things are really stuck, or you know someone who's really in that space, there's something really magical about rhythm, right? So rhythm starts re-regulating. So if you think about a dysregulation, it's like sounds that are just discordant, right? They're not going with each other. It's like weird noises. Doesn't feel nearly as good as something that's in tune, like a singing bowl. So what we want to do is bring our body back into harmony. Some of the best things that can, be for people who have really witnessed intense trauma can be very, repetitive stimuli, such as drumming, dancing, chanting. And so these three are amazing because they're not only having that, really steady beat and rhythmic entrainment, but there's also an element of socialization, right? So drumming, for example, is so great because, as you're drumming, you can kind of smile at the other drummers. You're like tuning to other drummers. And even if you're not really in tune, that overall just pounding of the drumming is really getting into you. And that's why also with, shamanic drumming, there's different ways to kind of open exploratory or otherworldly spaces from these rhythmic movements. But if we're kind of performing them ourselves as a person who's been through trauma, it can be really healing. So drumming, dancing, chanting. So that's, like even taking an affirmation and just saying it over and over and over again. That kind of repetitiveness can be really nurturing. Breath work. Again, breath is the way that we just get right into that, into the nervous system and can change things. So we can really use breath to center ourselves and bring it back. That's why, everyone's always like, take 10 deep breaths if you're angry. It's like, yeah, because you can literally re-regulate that way. And, as we started with this morning, that even just doing a breath for a couple minutes every morning, where you take the same length of inhale and exhale and just repeat that for a few minutes, can be so balancing for the system. In heart math, so they've studied actually the rhythms of your heartbeat, and it comes more into coherence or more steady pattern when you breathe in a specific way like that. So then some of the deeper root things are something about somatic therapy. So somatic therapy is really powerful. If you've never heard about it, it's not just talk therapy, but it's actually having you go back to that really intense situation where you wanted to run and allowing yourself to carry that through. And so there's some really interesting things there related to trauma. Brain spotting can be really powerful as well. That's more, again, related to like the visual field. And, there's other similar therapies as well, but just noticing that in different parts of where you're looking, you can actually store trauma. So say you were looking in one direction when something terrible happened, you're actually storing that memory from that perception of looking in that one direction. So that can be amazing. The Lucia number 3 is a tool that I work with light, and it has a very rhythmic stimulation as well that deeply relaxes the nervous system. And for me personally, that's helped shift me out of some major traumatic experience. And then, things like sensory deprivation tanks as well, like really getting away. So, and again, I recommend choosing a few of these or recommending a few of these, like if someone's going through things, because everyone has their own way and there's not just one thing. For example, if you do sensory deprivation tanks on its own, if you're depressed, you can also just really cycle into negative thoughts. or if you're just dancing and then dancing brings up some, anxiety or fear for you, that could make things worse. So I do recommend, taking multiple of these at a time. And, things like psychedelic therapy can, in a very therapeutic setting, can help kind of rewire traumatic situations. And then sound healing as well can be super nurturing. And again, it's more of that kind of rhythmic or like steady resonance that actually brings you, starting at the cellular level, back into coherence. So before we go any further, and we're about an hour in here, so we'll have about 5 or 10 more minutes of talking here, and then we'll do questions. But yeah, before we go any further, I just want to also acknowledge that we need to acknowledge the negativity bias. So unfortunately, due to our self-protecting mechanism of the body, that we're pretty negative forward. So that means that negative memories or information stick with us in a deeper way due to these survival instincts, because we have to be aware, right? It could happen again. We could be hurt. In our real life, there isn't that much real possibility for us dying. There can be, but it's pretty rare compared to what it used to be. But that still sticks with us in a really deep way, especially in the reptilian brain, as an important aspect that we need to really pay attention to. And therefore, negative things can stick stronger. And knowing that can give us some freedom, right? So knowing that if we find out bad information about someone, it can have more weight than good information. And there's studies for all of these. In a relationship, it takes 5 positive outcomes to cancel out 1 negative one. So this is really important to remember. It's not you, it's not the relationship, it's how we're wired. And acknowledging how much positivity we need to bring to overcome some of this negativity maybe can help us forgive some of those people who are just constantly spouting positivity. If that's triggering to you, just remember, well, yeah, we need a lot of positivity to even just cancel out, come into equilibrium with the intense things that are happening in our lives. Because even after things happen, negative things happen, these kind of traces remain in our brain. And really, they remain in our nervous system, and they remain in our neuroception, right? So then whatever we're perceiving is coming from the imprints of this. And again, only a small amount of our awareness is really seeing in this moment. So it's mainly based on these memories and perceptual processing. So what can we do about this? Igniting positivity. So first of all, I want to start by saying, take responsibility for your emotions, right? Igniting positivity just doesn't mean you just become a toxically positive person and like, oh, it'll be fine. Everything's going to work out. It's all good. Don't worry. It's fine. That is not helpful. Like, we do need to acknowledge our deep emotions and things in that. But do acknowledge, important to this is taking responsibility for those feelings. If you're in a bad mood, or if you start getting triggered by someone, pay attention to your thoughts and really take responsibility for them, because, there's no shame or guilt in what has happened to you in the past, and at the same time, we project so much onto other people. And, we're aware of that. There was a study that was done where there was a bunch of people sitting with their eyes closed. And if someone made a terror face or an angry face, the person felt it, even with their eyes closed. They could pinpoint the moment that the person started making these really negative things. So if you're thinking negative thoughts about somebody else, you are literally sending that energy to them. And so, yes, we all have our moments where we're not feeling balanced and we're feeling overwhelmed and stuff, but it's really about you. It's really not about other people or external circumstances. What you can't have, all of this stuff, like our mind loves to come up with these stories. And again, as we just talked about, the negativity is so much bigger and more grandiose than the positivity in our mind. We need so much more positivity. So if you are starting to feel negative thoughts about other people, oh, they didn't think about me, or, how dare they say that? They know that's upsetting to me, they didn't even acknowledge me, those kind of things. It's really important to just kind of flip back and say, like, how am I feeling? This is not about anyone else. This is about me. And, and then if that feels overwhelming, you can really just shift into, feeling other people being close to you and the love that you have experienced. And that's something to tune into every day, so in the morning, if you want to do like, starting your day with a really high frequency is like one of the best things you can do for yourself. So really meditating, or even just, if meditating feels overwhelming, you can just send this like loving kindness to others, right? So really hoping that everyone is in peace. So you can even really like just close your eyes and hug yourself and just like imagine being with people who love you and how fun that was, and just like reliving those positive memories. That can really help things shift. Gratitude journaling, taking a time each day to really acknowledge what is going right in your life and loving for the others that you care for in your life. Also making positive times even stronger by savoring good experiences. And this is great to do with little kids as well. So if something happened, like, wasn't that amazing? Isn't that delicious? What does it taste like? What are all the different descriptions? And it's like, you can do that with yourself. You're eating a good meal. Are you just shoveling it in, or are you really savoring each bite and being like, wow, this subtle flavor? Or if I add this sauce, how does this change things? How do I feel? Like, really savoring those things starts bringing the positivity to the forefront. Sending loving thoughts to others, and visualization exercises, imagining the highest possible outcome, or even just bringing light to a situation. So you can literally just close your eyes, bring into your conscious awareness. Let's actually do this as exercise. So take a moment, if you would like, and close your eyes, straighten your spine. Taking a couple nice deep breaths. Now bring to the forefront of your consciousness a situation or person or an experience that happened recently or is currently entangled. Doesn't feel the best. So just feel into that. Just really feel what it is objectively. And you can notice if you have any interoception, like if there's any difference, situation I'm feeling. I can feel a little contraction in my stomach. Maybe your head feels a little tight. Any kind of shift in your internal awareness. And then bring in light. So just imagine this big white, like almost blindingly bright light coming into your awareness and surrounding that whole situation. Let's just sit with that, really focusing on that light and the situation. And then bringing to mind the most positive outcome that you can imagine that would happen in this situation. And maintaining that awareness of the light on the situation and just watching the outcome in your mind's eye. Now let the awareness of the situation itself fade away and just feel the light. Feel the light surrounding you, feel it in your heart space. And whenever you're ready, slowly coming back, gently fluttering your eyes. Just noticing if there's anything different. And how, so much, we live in this quantum reality, and there's this fabric of energy connecting all of us. And again, it's not to ignore the negativity or anything like that, but like the more we bring this conscious awareness of positivity and light and trust and gratitude and forgiveness to our life and to different situations, and just by literally taking 15 minutes every morning to engage in some of these practices, you'll really start seeing things change. And if you're really dealing with, or someone you care for or love, or a client is dealing with some of this deeper trauma that's preventing them from being able to be present enough to start doing some of these kind of top-down techniques, really getting, suggesting help for them or finding help for yourself and a more consistent practice of working from the bottom-up techniques is so essential to shifting. So yeah, to maintain a lower baseline level of stress in our life, daily practices, regular time for down regulation, even if it's literally just 20-minute nap, this is really helpful for the nervous system. Self-care, such as eating well, practicing yoga, taking a bath, and then these social relationships in our life, right? Of healthy communication, and that can mean in your thoughts as well. Mutually nurturing relationships, forgiveness, and gratitude are all practices. And finally, we'll close up here with some recommended books for deeper reading. So if any of the things we're talking about today really hit any chords with you, there's a couple books that I would recommend to dive deeper in. Polyvagal Theory, this book, it's not as exciting in the front, is by Stephen Porges. And if you really want to get nitty gritty into the vagus nerve and all these different branches of the vagus nerve and the understanding that evolution from primitive to the social engagement, that's a really wonderful book. Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve, this is a great book by Stanley Rosenberg. And this has some exercises as well in it. I actually did an exercise with Find My Zen. You can see a few of them. For example, just even like stroking your face gently. And there's another one if you can check out in the Calm and the Chaos series. I'll include the link with the replay here, but that's a great, there's different great techniques in this book for that. Another book that I would recommend is The Body Keeps the Score. And this is Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma. And this book's amazing. So there's plenty of ways to dig deeper. And if you're interested in learning more about this from this series, I will be hosting this for 2 more weeks to come forward. And, as I said, the next week will be more about talking about attachment theory and understanding attachment and how that affects our social relationships, and developmental trauma and how that affects kind of our baseline of stress in our lives. And again, this can be applied to you, people you love, your children, your parents. And, my sincere intention with all of this is to just get this knowledge out. I'm passionate about it, and I care about it, and I care about you, and I care about people in this world. So if there's any financial pressure, you can sign up anyway for all 3 weeks without paying. It's totally fine with me. If you have something to donate and you're finding this helpful, then go for it. I'm also available for one-to-one sessions. So if you have anything coming up for you that you would like some reflection on, or some suggestions and what tools might be most appropriate for you, or again, a loved one, then definitely feel free to reach out to me and we can set something up. And I'm going to kind of stop sharing now. And I just want to open up the question space. So if anyone has any questions at this point about anything that we covered, if you want to enter them now in the chat. Anyone out there have questions? All right, that was a lot of information. So I hope it went over well. Any feedback from this, I would love to hear, including, positive or negative things or things I didn't cover that you would like to hear more about in the future ones. Okay, let's see. Robin, visualization of situations in the past or bringing light to the past. Yes, absolutely. So that's a really powerful tool. And they've actually done studies showing that, for example, praying can be a kind of intense word, but really if you can send energy to the past and to the future. And so for the future, that's really a blessing for the best possible outcome, right? And for the past, it can be a healing or softening of the intensity of the energies there. We live in a quantum reality, and we'll get into that more into the third week in the flow state in terms of doing this, activating that. But absolutely, you can bring that to anything, and in your daily meditation practice. Again, a lot of people think that meditation is just sitting there and just clearing your mind, and that is definitely one way to meditate. But there's more active methods too that, really bringing light to situations. I've practiced even just bringing that light of awareness to the earth in this time, or to all the people who are suffering from fear or sickness. And it's really powerful. The study that they did showing, like praying for people who had been sick actually changed outcomes in the present. So you are powerful, and we need your energy and prayer here. All of you who are watching, and sharing this with your family and friends can be really wonderful as well. So thank you so much for showing up, and there will be replays for this, and you're welcome to share that as well. Again, I just really want to get this information out there. So thanks for helping me do that and receiving. And if you have any other questions, be in touch. Otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.